Welcome to Rohmer Cast, the podcast about the great French filmmaker Eric Rohmer, his films, his working methods, and whatever we want to talk about related to Eric Rohmer. I'm Liam Billingham, and I'm with
Sean Senavrotna.
Sean Senavrotna. Sean, hi buddy.
What's
How are
up,
you?
Man? How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm well. I'm here in Los Angeles. A little bit about me. I'm a filmmaker and now a podcast producer living in LA. I used to live in New York where I was friends with Sean, and we worked together at a place called Brick. Sean, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Sean Senavrotna, and I am a filmmaker and educator, and I met Liam at Brick. Our boss at the time, Jill Beal.
Shout out to Jill Beal.
Shout out to Jill Beal.
Hopefully listen to this podcast.
That'd be very cool.
Jill, Jill.
She's the beginning of our friendship arc. She is the origin of this.
Started it.
She introduced
the two. She was like, you guys would be friends.
Yeah. And then from the moment she introduced us, we stood in the hallway for an hour and a half continuing to talk about movies and life.
Was it that long?
It felt feature-length to me. Honestly, it could have been like at my dinner with Andre. We could have our own, like, my meeting with Liam. And,
What? No, it's totally true. What is interesting about that initial conversation, well, maybe it's not interesting, but it is a fact, is that we did not talk about Eric Rohmer.
That is
the
true.
Subject of this podcast.
That is
Eric
true.
Rohmer only came up later in our friendship. And I'll tell you, for me, one thing that absolutely kicked this off is, well, let's pause for a second. And talk about what we're wearing. Sean, what are you wearing?
Well, I was bad with the assignment on this. I was supposed to be wearing the same shirt that Liam has.
I'm not wearing the shirt, but I do have it.
But it is an Eric Rohmer Green Ray shirt, and it's really fucking cool. And
we bought the shirt on the same day. It's from Human Boy Worldwide, which is a great boutique and film fashion website. I hesitate to say that I have at least 2 things in pre-order right now from them.
Yeah,
their Lars von Trier Breaking the Waves hat and their Killing of a Chinese Bookie t-shirt. But right now, you're wearing what shirt is that?
This is the Girlfriend's shirt.
The Girlfriend shirt.
Yeah, and it's a version of the movie poster with a very cool slogan at the top. It says, everybody has one, wants one, or... Sorry, I'm trying to read it upside down.
It says everyone has one, wants one, or is one.
There we go.
Great shirt.
And
who's featured on the shirt?
And the actor on the shirt is the lead actor from the film, whose name I can't remember right now.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm wearing my Paulina Laplace Eric Rohmer Comedies and Proverbs hat, which I got very recently and which I love, and I live in Southern California. It's my go-to beach hat. I wear it to the beach with a Hawaiian or summer-ish shirt whenever I can. It's also my pool hat, so it occasionally feels that sweet, sweet chlorine when my daughter splashes me in the face,
you're living such a different hat life than me.
My hat life is different.
Your hat life gets to go to the beach. My hat life could go to the beach, and it sometimes goes to Rockaway, but I think our hat lives are very different experiences. But when I do rock that hat, without fail, people will say something to me. Someone has come up to me and started a conversation. Either it's like, oh, cool hat, and this moment of recognition of being familiar with Rohmer, or it's a curiosity. People look at it. Or it's a cool hat. Yeah, or it's just a cool hat, or it's just like, what is that? People want to understand, what does it mean, or what does it translate to?
Something in the air with Eric Rohmer. It feels as though we're having this moment. You know, I think, at the risk of being overly generalized, when people think of the French New Wave, broadly, they think of 2 people.
Yep.
Jean-Luc Godard and Francois Truffaut.
Yes.
And Eric Rohmer is, at least in the larger film world outside of the niche French New Wave obsessives, sort of certainly not the forgotten one by any stretch, but like a little more of the conventional one. He was himself a little more conventional, a little more conservative than them, and certainly in his filmmaking technique. But I have come to feel like he's omnipresent in our culture. You know, there was an article in GQ last summer called The Rohmer Guy, which was about, inspired by the men in Eric Rohmer's films. This trend is all about looking good while hanging out on vacation.
Which is so funny that it's also in GQ, because all the men in Rohmer films, particularly the 6 Moral Tales, are all very questionable for the most part, douchebags, but also not totally douchebags. But it's very interesting that it's like how to be that guy, which is very much on brand with certain personalities that exist.
Right, and beyond that, it's like with the hats and the fact that people are buying Riviere t-shirts, maybe beyond us, Paulina Laplace hats, uh, the Rohmer guy article, and then one of the things that spurred me to finally text you and say two things spurred me to text you and go like, Sean, we've been talking about this for a while. One is I was listening to, I was obsessed with Olivier Assayas's series Irma Vep on HBO Max, and I heard an interview with him on The Watch. Maybe we'll drop in a couple seconds of that. I haven't decided yet. And the interview basically ends with him saying, everything goes back to Rohmer. Rohmer is the guy for me. And if you watch Olivier Assayas's films, and if you watch Irma Vep, there's a certain, maybe superficial, but there's beyond just the French language, but there's a certain style that you see replicated in some of his filmmaking.
Yeah.
Certainly
when
in
I think of
Irma Vep.
When I think of Assayas and Rohmer, I also feel there's this quality of him saying it as an adult. And when you look at his earlier films, there's it feels like that same energy of like a Truffaut. And I think that also has to go with why we're coming to Rohmer at a certain point of time in our lives. And so, we think of these titans of like the new wave. We think of Truffaut, we think of Godard,
Right.
and Rohmer isn't that first one. I think it's because you need to grow into him. And I don't think
I agree with that.
Seeing it at 19 is going to be... Imagine if, like, you're in a class and you're talking about the French New Wave and My Night at Maud's is the first movie that you're introduced to at the age of 19. You would have a very sort of different idea and interest in that realm of cinema than when you're first introduced to Godard or Truffaut. Now, having that initial spark then allows us to sort of mature into Rohmer, where at first, I don't know if, like, when I first saw La Collectionneuse, I was like, this is cool, but I kind of just appreciated it. And now I'm at this point where, like, I've completely just fallen in love with him as a filmmaker,
Right.
and I've become obsessed with studying him. And so I'm just trying to read every interview, read every article, watch every movie, buying all the UK Region 2 DVDs just to try to understand
How do you
does
play
Rohmer
those?
think.
Do those play on your Blu-ray? Do you have a regionless Blu-ray player?
Yeah, I have 2 Blu-ray players.
Oh, that's the way to do it.
That's some
It's funny.
real
It's
film
funny
nerd
you bring
stuff.
that up. So my interest in him, though, of course, as a filmmaker, I'm interested. Is I have this very, very funny story that I'll tell you very, very briefly about my relationship to Eric Rohmer, which is in the grand old of year, I think of 1999 or 2000. I went to a Blockbuster Video with my sisters at midnight so that they could buy a copy of Titanic when it was released on home video. One of them was in college, or they were maybe both in college. Yeah, they were both in college at that point. And they both wanted to buy a copy. For some reason,
Was the home
ahead.
video released at the
was a
same
big
time that it was
deal.
available for rental, or this was already
No.
after? It was all same day and date.
I think at this point it was all same day and date.
Okay.
I think that's how they did it. They were definitely buying a VHS tape, and
Yeah.
if you recall, in those days, like buying a VHS tape of a movie before it was out of the rental market was expensive. But I think they
Yeah.
paid like a normal. Well, they paid like $30 for a VHS tape, but for some reason, I don't know why. Maybe it was Entertainment Weekly, but the other thing that was getting released on home video for the first time in like years that day was Claire's Knee. And I was like,
And that was part of
"What's
the news of the day.
It was like the Entertainment Weekly, yeah, whatever was the thing. So I
amazing.
remember saying to my sisters, when we go to Blockbuster and you're waiting in line to buy the Titanic, you should come up and be like, "Hi, I'd like a copy of Claire's Knee, please," because it would just be such a weird thing to say at a Blockbuster. Like, I think that'd be really funny. Now, I knew nothing about Eric Rohmer at the time. I was like, oh, this is some weird French thing. But like, he's like, it's like I read the description. It was
Yeah.
like, it talked about the superficial things that are true about Rohmer, which is it's about relationships, it's about dialogue, it's
Yeah.
let's say languidly paced, which.
I disagree
some
with
ways-
all these lazy things people say about
I mean, I
Rohmer.
think it is superficially true, and that's fine. But like, it was really so. In a way, he was like sort of the first, like, let's say, unconventional. 17, 18 years old.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I was starting to read about things, but I certainly hadn't seen a lot of French film. And then a few years later, many years later, not a few. I'd seen a few films, but I spent my wedding day while my wife was getting ready for our wedding watching Rohmer films with my father-in-law.
Yeah.
And that's very personal memory of it and a significant memory. And since then, I've watched a few. I don't think I've seen as many Rohmer films as you, but they've like imprinted on my consciousness. Like despite having seen, more than a handful, but certainly I'm not a completist on him. He's always kind of been there. And, previously, the podcast that's on the feed that you're listening to this on was called Oeuvre Busters, and that was an exhaustive deep dive into people like Cassavetes, Philip Seymour Hoffman. And this is similar, though, and I think now might be a good time to lay out the sort of the goals here. This is like a low-key, fun, easy exploration of Rohmer that goes into detail, but, as of now, it's not a weekly podcast. It is not we're not going to be at that kind of high-key consistency. Maybe, I think we're aiming for once a month. Though, part of the reason we kicked this off, and now I'm remembering the second reason I was like, let's finally do this, is that Metrograph in New York City does their Summers of Rohmer series. And their Summers of Rohmer series cover, in the month of August, as summer's dwindling and there's that melancholic feeling in the air, they very wisely show Eric Rohmer films. Sean, will you tell us what films are being covered by Metrograph in the August of 2022?
Yes. So at Metrograph,
you need to get a book to do it, Sean. Come on, Sean.
I just want to comb it for any other interesting facts and blurbs that might be in this beautiful, beautiful journal that's always available at Metrograph. And
it's like a little booklet?
It's a little booklet, and I was actually just talking to my wife about how, like, these are super important and we should be saving these, and like...
I totally agree,
I hope
100%.
I hope I find some more around my apartment, but... so part of this year's Summer of Rohmer series is The Aviator's Wife, which is the movie that we'll be discussing today. That's from 1981. Then playing this week, opening this weekend, is Four Adventures of Reinette and Mirabelle. This is from 1987. I'm really excited for this one. This one had been pretty hard to find. It's still not the most accessible one. So it's very cool that Metrograph Pictures, which is their distribution arm, is doing the release for this. And then finally is my favorite Rohmer film, Boyfriends and Girlfriends, also from 1987. So all of these are playing in theaters at the
and
Metrograph
on the
in New York
Metrograph
City.
app.
And the Metrograph app. So no matter where you are, you could download the app and watch the films over there until September 29th, I believe.
Which is what I did. And so part of the reason that we finally decided to do this is we were thinking of a way in and we had a little bit of a disagreement, which is fine. I was thinking we would do it chronologically. We'd start at the beginning and move to the end. And I think Sean, and I will say now wisely, was like, let's not start at the beginning. Let's start, let's say, in the middle. Let's start in the middle so we can go backwards. Kind of like some effective storytelling where you start in the middle of the story and you want to go back to the beginning to understand.
Yeah. I just don't I don't think, I know we always want to think of history in terms of chronology, but history's importance is created by a dialogue between two different eras. And so
Can we write that down? That's a pretty good quote. We should write that down. That's going on the epitaph.
To start at the beginning isn't always the best way to truly understand Rohmer at his best and what he's all about. Those early works, we get to see him becoming who he is, but to be honest, you don't actually see who they are at the very beginning. You see it at a certain point, and I think the point that we're going to be starting with is a really interesting point in his career.
And we decided to start with Aviator's Wife because it's not always easy to find these films. I certainly have never seen Aviator's Wife on a streaming service before. Not that I've hunted it down per se, but I haven't always been able to find it. So we want to aim to make this podcast. Rohmer in some ways is an inaccessible filmmaker. Much more, I would say, by the way, in terms of distribution than his movies. I think his movies are actually quite accessible.
It's insane,
But they're hard to get.
Yeah.
They're hard to get unless you want to buy a Blu-ray player, a regionless Blu-ray player, and spend $150 on a UK box set, which I've considered doing this week when I was having trouble with the stream. But we want to cover these movies in a way that's accessible to the audience, not in a way that's chronological, and you might not be able to find his first feature, The Sign of Leo,
Right.
currently playing on Mubi.com. That's not always going to be there. You know, movies come and they go and they disappear, and so think of this as an exploration of Rohmer, and the larger French cinema thing.
Yeah.
So we'll be probably talking about other things. Oh my goodness, this is like the longest.
I want to make
intro.
It is a long
Sean,
intro.
come on. I'm kidding.
Let's consider this the portion of figuring out what the show is sort of going to really be with each other. And
I love it. And it's live for you.
And it's
audience.
live for you, the audience.
So this is going to be a longer episode, but it's fine.
Yeah.
Why
I think what's
we're already
really
apologizing. Do you like to already apologize for your podcast? You're like, sorry, it's so long. Sorry, guys.
No, I'm
sorry.
never going to say I'm sorry on this podcast,
Never
even to you.
Never apologize. Okay.
I just think like, I'll apologize, but I think in the context of entertainment, it's probably going to be funnier to move it along and not apologize.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll end the final episode with all apologies.
I'm so sorry.
That
and
Nirvana.
And that time when I got a little heated when you said that part was unnecessary.
I love you. Let's kiss.
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump right in.
I'm
sorry.
So what I wanted to say was
Sean.
what's really important and I think is interesting is, especially with podcasts, it's easy to talk about narrative. People talk about narrative. People talk about plot. But I really haven't had a deep filmic exploration into like the direction. And so that's the lens in which I always watch movies, and that's the lens in which I'm most fascinated by Rohmer. So I'm really sort of looking at him through this sort of production lens and this direction lens, and the lessons that we can learn from Eric Rohmer that could better us as artists and filmmakers.
I was trying to say something funny. I couldn't think of anything funny to say. No, I think that's great. I think that's exciting. I try to weave a lot of. I'm going to try to just respond to that, and and be spontaneous. And I have some thoughts on the movie. And I think that what's interesting about the way we complement each other is that we have similar educations in these things, and we both come at it from a filmmaking perspective. I think I tend to respond to the themes and the ideas, and I back into the technique. And so it's not that you're not doing that too, but I think you're kind of technique first from a conversational standpoint, whereas I think I'm a little more like I sent you a screenshot of what I think is the key frame of the film last night, and a lot of my thinking comes from that. Very, very quickly, let's move in. So we're going to talk about the aviator's wife, right? And I think we've kind of covered what are considered the superficial qualities of Eric Rohmer, or what makes a film. Were we saying Rohmer-esque or Romerian? I think Rohmer-esque is closer. Right?
Oh, I think Romerian sounds more beautiful.
You heard it here first. Romerian is, but then I think of George Romero. That's the one
also
thing.
cool. I mean, they should be in conversation with each other.
There's nothing wrong with George Romero.
They're
That's
both
for
amazing
sure.
filmmakers.
So the superficial qualities of being Romerian are lots of dialogue, long shots, languid pace, people with fake problems to some extent. Like, I'm on vacation. This is so hard. But I think that those are the superficial qualities. I also think that there's people who are like, oh, these are just chill vibe movies. And they are. They're on superficial level. They're very chill vibes. They're fun to look at. He knows how to photograph things. But I think what is hidden there, and you can speak to this, is that there's a maximum amount of control in the filmmaking, but that is hidden by a real spontaneity and present tense kind of filmmaking in the present tense filmmaking in the filmmaking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And it is interesting to talk about these superficial qualities, because the thing that I feel from Rohmer is the most suspenseful kinds of narratives. I think he's Hitchcock level master of suspense, and his plotting is so in a way mathematical, but also dominoes just falling one after another, and there's constantly moving, and it's always building, and that dialogue is always action. His movies to me are ultimately action movies, because there's always an action that's actually happening.
I was thinking that they're action movies. Literally every movie is an action movie.
Every movie is an action movie.
Are better action movies than other action movies.
Yeah.
And this Aviator's Wife, which is the film we're talking about, is
it's an action movie.
It's also a detective story.
It's also a detective story. And so, You know,
Why don't you tell us?
Yeah.
Go. Oh,
And then I think about these people,
God
and
damn
like
it, Sean.
you're talking about, like what because we have to respond to the chill vibes, sort of not even misinformation, but like misconception. It's like there's always the veneer of like a peaceful environment, but like there's so much repressed, languid desire that's bubbling underneath everything always, that like it's always just like a beautiful environment to like stormy passions that get reasoned through, which is the thing that makes him very fascinating, is his characters very rarely give into their senses, and it's always about reasoning and talking
Brain.
and what the
Yeah.
brain can convince yourself is the truth, which is
The head
another
and the
huge
heart.
part of this movie as well.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great segue into what the movie is, which is about many, many different things. So the film we're talking about is The Aviator's Wife. Now, what I'm going to read to you, and then, or actually, Sean, why don't you read it? Which is the
Sure.
description that the Metrograph website gives for the film, and then I'm going to try to like do a very, very quick summary of the film, just a top line summary of the
great.
film
Well-
that I forgot to write. So please correct me if I make it.
Well, since I have my Metrograph
Ooh,
journal,
please.
I'm going to read from the journal directly. I mean,
Ooh.
I'm not a religious person. I feel like cinema is my religion, and
Is that what you say to is that what you said to the girls
Is this
before
my
you were
Bible?
married? You were like, cinema's my religion, baby.
Oh my God! Wait, do you want to know what my name on OkCupid was?
I mean, no, but go ahead.
Before Seanrise. So it was a play on
that's the
Before
end
Sunrise.
of the podcast, everybody.
I
Good night.
just want to say, like, if I had to flash back to 2010, it's very kind of on brand that I'm here talking about Eric Rohmer on a podcast. For some reason,
Yeah.
that makes sense that it started with Before Seanrise. So,
Yeah.
The Aviator's Wife.
Wait, hang on real
Yeah.
quick. Is that OkCupid profile still available? Is it still up? Did you take it down?
Oh, it's
Actually, don't answer that, because if the answer isn't the right one, it's not good. Christine will be like, "What? Wait, why is that still up?"
Well, now this is a
All right, tell us
new
about
fun detective story.
Aviator's Wife. Ooh, it is.
So, The Aviator's Wife, the inaugural film of Rohmer's comedies and proverbs cycle. The Aviator's Wife is a fleecy farce of romantic overanalysis that finds the director exploring the possibilities of handheld camera work and following a narrative expression of the opening epigraph. It is impossible to think of nothing. A young man sees his girlfriend's ex leaving her apartment one early morning, and his imagination is off to the races as stars Philippe Marlowe and Marie Riviere introduce a younger, less perfectly articulate type of Rohmer character than those of the moral tales.
So, The Aviator's Wife. Sean, tell me about how you saw this movie.
So, I got to see this movie at the Metrograph Theater in New York City.
Dime Square.
In Dime Square.
I don't get it.
Below
Anyways, it's
Chinatown.
Yeah.
The greatest movie theater in New York City.
That's a bold assertion.
My favorite movie theater in New York City.
I've never been there. I never made it before we moved.
Oh, really? Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, when you come to visit New York, then we're going to absolutely go.
We'll go.
Get
Metrograph,
and I got to
free
see
tickets.
it. It was a packed audience. I got to see it with
Amazing.
my
There were
wife.
a lot of people were there?
It was totally packed. Yeah.
Oh, that rules.
God
bless New York City's losers who go to see movies in the American
Everyone really responded to the film in the way that I think it's meant to be responded to. It's a romantic comedy. It's funny.
It is
and
a romantic
People
comedy.
were laughing, and it was really great. I watched it with my wife, and which was really cool too, because this is her second Rohmer film. We had watched La Collection News together many years ago, and I had fallen in love with Rohmer since, in a way that I wasn't when we had first seen it. So, like, for us to watch The Aviator's Wife together and for her to be introduced to Rohmer now and, like, her loving it too was, like, made this experience, like, really, really cool.
And it's a real slow burn. You've said this before, but it's a slow burn to fall in love with Rohmer. You kind of have to age into him. You know, I was thinking recently about one of the only filmmakers. I don't watch films as obsessively as I used to, but one filmmaker whose work I've explored in my teens, 20s, and 30s multiple times, not every film, is Akira Kurosawa. And I feel like that's been such a rewarding thing to come back to and be a different person every decade. But I do think that, like, Rohmer's different in your 20s than he is in your late 30s. And only
Yeah.
now do I feel like I'm blossoming into
Yeah,
understanding. And it
yeah.
could be because it's an older filmmaker reflecting on youth a lot of the time.
Well, what's interesting about that is like I almost feel like he's like an older filmmaker that's observational and has just the most keen human observations on youth, and that's what's so cool when I've shown this movie to or shown the Green Ray to younger folks. The Green Ray seems to be the one that people really, really connect to. And like I've seen 19, 20-year-olds fall in love with Rohmer. So I think discovering the Green Ray, starting with something like that, can allow this like really awesome gateway.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that's really interesting about Rohmer is that he's often viewed superficially as being very French, very conversational, very chatty.
Yeah.
Very languid, very slow. And I think you agree. I don't agree with any of those assertions. I actually think that one of the things that blows my mind the most about this movie is that it's a bit of an action movie.
I
It's
completely
also
agree.
an existentialist detective drama in
Yeah.
the most like
but not in
profound
like
ways.
but not in like a an art house. Like there's so many art house movies that have just probably described themselves as like an existentialist detective drama, and it's not quite that, but it ends up being this sort of like very casual detective drama that is about these
Right.
sort of like larger issues, or like just like how human beings relate to each other, of like the human condition. But if you haven't seen the film before and you're listening to this, it's not like Under the Silver Lake or something like that. When we talk about like
Right.
existential, just thinking of like that sort of phrasing,
It's
but
a
it's
film
like
that it's
absolutely is.
close to for me a little bit is Police Adjective, the Romanian drama from I believe 2008, which is very, very good. And I mean that's a deep pull. But yeah, this is a thoughtful, reflective movie, much more driven by like it has existentialist leanings.
Yeah.
Rohmer has said on more than one occasion, like the goal of my movie is to I'm not trying to make this like post-war literary. I'm not
Yeah.
following the post-war literary tradition here. I'm making an existentialist film. He references in the autobiography, or not the autobiography, the biography I'm reading, piecemeal as we go through these films. He references Sartre and the Sartrean
Yeah.
experience of life, which is a whole other thing, but very existentialist. Let's jump into the story. So I'm gonna talk about a little bit of the movie, then we're just gonna dive into these.
Yep.
So
Cool.
first of all, the movie begins with a proverb, which is the name of the movie is The Aviator's Wife, or Sean.
One cannot think of nothing.
Hits hard. It
Yeah.
hits hard, that one. It's like it's deep. It hits me that line hits me like a ton of bricks. So the movie opens with Francois working at the post office. Sean, tell me a little bit about the scene where Francois is working at the post office, because it does not feel like the Rohmer we've come to know.
Oh, this so when this movie opens up, it really feels like you are watching a documentary, and I think that's I would describe this movie as like neo-realist romantic comedy, where it really feels. let's coin that here.
Verite
Neo-realist.
romantic comedy.
Verite
Neo-realist
romantic comedy.
Yeah, it has a verite quality in the
Yeah, and it opens up with essentially documentary images of this post office, and it's
has
established
to
a
be
certain
real.
rhythm.
Has to
It's
be real
absolutely
people
real.
working in the post office.
Oh,
like
totally.
he just inserted Philip Merland, the actor,
Yep.
into the scene and was like, "Go work in the post office."
Yeah, exactly. Just go work in the post office, and the first time you see who's going to be our protagonist, Francois, played by the actor Philippe Marlowe, is just one of the many postal workers, and those are the little things that Rohmer does to establish this scene and really establish environment, which are all relevant to the story that's about to unfold.
Totally, and he feels like one of many, which I
One
think
of
is
many.
interesting too. There's nothing like exceptional about him
Yeah,
in
and
a traditional sense.
imagine the Hollywood version of this, right? Like you'd have the key light on the actor, like there'd be the push in, like this
Right.
is our main character, and Rohmer
Well, and
doesn't
I
do
also,
gimmicks.
I think that's true, and I also think that like he wrote, according to the biography, he wrote an autobiographical version of this story a long time ago. So it feels like it's autobiographical, and I also do feel like it's a movie about youth. It's a movie about your like when you're having a job when you're young. It's a movie about staying up late and working and studying during the day because
Yeah.
Francois is a common law student. We hear something in this first scene. Let me attempt to. How's my whistling?
Your whistling's amazing. I'm impressed by anyone whistling. Yeah,
It's kind of strong,
really
right? So the is a coworker of Francois, who he works with, who's whistling throughout the scene. Now, do you remember, how do we see this person in the first frame?
So, did you say it was the coworker that was whistling?
It's his coworker.
No, it's him.
Right? He's whistling.
He's whistling. The coworker.
That's right.
Which makes it
This is
even
what happens,
more
by the
of
way,
like,
when you watch the movie, as I did, which we didn't talk about, in two different settings, because
yeah.
you have the Metrograph at home app and you can't stay awake past 9 o'clock, so you fall asleep watching the movie. So that. And then the next night you have Decemberist tickets because you're 40 and you have to go to that, so you have to finish the film the next night.
when that's really great. And
I like my life.
And also, when I had seen it in theaters too, I wasn't clear because it wasn't until revisiting it, watching it again on my Blu-ray, that I realized that it was Francois that was whistling, and that's because it's a thing that's there at the beginning, and our brains aren't even paying attention to it.
Which is what makes the tradition that Rohmer comes from, which is this very intellectual, well-educated kind of... Now, he didn't come from wealth or money. He's pretty regular parents. I believe his father worked in politics. But, like, very well-educated and, like, definitely knows his drama, like, knows his Chekhov, knows, like, that something you introduce in the first act should come back in the later thing. One of the great things about filmmaking, more than novels, I think, and to some extent music totally does this, I should say, not to some extent, music absolutely does this, is that the repetition of an image or a phrase or a key idea is like a very, very powerful way.
Yeah, well, it also kind of ties...
To affect us emotionally.
Yeah, and it's almost like, it's also important to note that he's someone that identified as a Catholic. You know, he's a religious person, and I feel like in these patterns, in these coincidences, these are the sort of like little miracles that kind of happen in our life, and I think there is something sort of like, there's a spiritual quality to these sort of repetitions throughout the film.
Spirit, not religious, which I think is really an important distinction.
Yeah,
and
he is not a religious filmmaker, and I wouldn't even necessarily call him a spiritual filmmaker, you know, but he's not like a Malik.
A joie de vivre. A spirit of life to his film, you know. And I know that's not a direct translation. Francois leaves work. He heads to Marie's house. Marie is his girlfriend, Anne. His girlfriend is Anne, played by Marie Riviere, who would later become a huge part of Rohmer's sort of cadre of actors.
One of his key collaborators out of many key collaborators.
And didn't she help him break the story? It's like a writer's room. Welcome to the Rohmer writer's room. But she did give him an idea for the story, right?
Yeah, so with the Aviator's wife, they had worked on Perceval, which was part of his historical series in the 70s. And they were working on... just talking to each other as friends, and she was going through a breakup with an actor that left her. So she was feeling very much like the character of Anne in The Aviator. And it was this paired with a story of Rohmer being left in his youth that kind of forms the bones of what The Aviator's wife would be.
So it's interesting that you bring up that she'd had this experience, because a scene after Francois comes and sees her, she goes to work. She's in a bad mood. This boyfriend, the Aviator, has broken up with her. He says he's getting back to his wife, and Francois sees her leaving her apartment with him. Marie and the Aviator have not made love or anything like that. They have breakfast and then they leave, but Francois's brain spins in a bunch of directions. But now we follow Marie, and she goes to work. She's in a bad mood. She's having a hard day. She's at work. She works in some kind of sort of clerical
role, it seems like she's like a secretary or executive assistant or...
Exactly. And so she goes, by the way, seeing people do actual like analog work and on computers.
Well, also just it's a movie that understands and respects or is honest about work and how it's a part of someone's life. And she has a completely different life. She has another friend over there that, her work colleague, right? We see these aspects of someone's life that never get fully
100%
dived into.
And also, they go to lunch together, and they go to lunch at a busy French cafe where there's a lot of people around, and Rohmer shoots a lot of side shots of this in twos, and we can feel sort of the compressed nature of it. You get in, you get out, you have a 30-minute lunch. I know that there's the traditional image of the French is that they have these 2-hour lunches, but this doesn't feel that way at all.
Oh, yeah.
It in fact feels very agitated and very fast. They order immediately.
Well, she also is, she's trying to get the waiter's attention, so you have a great little behavior of that.
Come on,
And then
let's
she also
go,
does
let's go.
something quite rude to her friend. She says, "My sandwich can come first, hers can wait." And then her friend says something to the effect of, "That's not so nice." So already we're getting this little
Yeah.
character beat of like Anne as a person, and she is a little bit, lost in her own. One cannot think of nothing, right?
Right, 100%.
Oh.
And the one thing that I think is really interesting is like to make a modern comparison. You might laugh at me when I say this, but you know what I thought a little bit about? Like the
Sitcoms.
sitcoms, Seinfeld. I thought
Yeah.
about Elaine Bennis in Seinfeld. I was
Yeah.
like, this is like a proto Elaine Bennis. Like not as funny, not as ridiculous, but like Julia Louis-Dreyfus even has this sort of like constantly on edge, irritated
Right.
by men in her
Yeah.
life. Kind of
I
like,
don't
I'm
have
surrounded
grace. I
by
don't want
bozos.
grace. I'll never have grace.
Right. It feels like that a little bit.
Yeah.
And like Marie, Anne, I should say, not Marie. Anne grates on my nerves. I'm like, you're kind of annoying. Like, ugh, chill out.
But she's so,
had
what's
a
so
tough day.
beautiful about that though is, I tend to not be very judgmental of characters. I see them as like, this is a document of a real person that exists, and let me just look at it observationally. And so,
Sure, but you can be annoyed by them. You can still
For
find them
sure.
annoying. Like,
For
I'm
sure,
not sitting
for
here
sure.
being like, I hate her and I wish she were dead. I just
but yeah,
like
there are
I-
people that watch movies that way, and it's a very sort of like, almost like, whoa, like,
Well, that's-
like accept that, like, she's not a terrible, but she's just someone
yeah.
that's going through it and has her, is at a specific point in her life that might not
And those
be
people
her
have
best.
morality. There's
Yeah,
issues with morality,
yeah.
clearly. Like, a movie character isn't real. But I
Yeah.
do think it's a totally normal reaction. And something I really like is to be irritated by a character. This is such a
Yeah.
digression, but I watched Michael Bay's Ambulance recently.
Is
and
that a
Jake
new movie? Is that an
Gyllenhaal-
old movie?
Yeah,
I'm
it's a
not
new
familiar
one.
with it.
But
Okay.
Jake Gyllenhaal gives the great... Oh, listen to you. I'm not familiar with that Michael Bay film. Jake Gyllenhaal gives one of the
I love
great
Michael
time...
Bay. Just-
irritating performances. He's unfucking believable in the movie. And part of it is because he's like, I'm going to be as irritating as I want to be in this role, and I don't care. And it kicks ass. So, speaking of irritating...
Someone being so authentically themselves on screen. And that's what
Which is-
Marie is able to give us through
and
Anne.
Francois, and one of the differences between Rohmer's comedies and proverbs and his moral tales
Mm-hmm.
is that he tailored the characters to the actors, as
Yes.
opposed to making the actors play characters. Francois walks into the cafe. He wants Anne's... Why do I keep doing that? He wants Anne's attention. She decides to leave. And what follows is a confrontation on the street
So cool.
between Marie and Francois.
Again, it's action cinema. I mean, even
Tell
beyond
me about
this.
it. Yes,
Yeah.
give me the like. What did you notice about the shooting? Like, how is it done? Like,
yeah.
why does it work so well?
So prior to the scene, everything's been fairly locked off, pretty composed, but not like overly composed, not fussy. But we're just observing these characters, but these characters are fairly still. In this scene, we have so much action, so much activity, and it feels like you're seeing handheld war reportage footage. And that's the beauty of it. And I
Yes.
think when handheld works well is that, oh no, we're like, it has to be shot this way because we're just trying to keep up with them.
And it's not tossed off. It's not like he
It's
didn't
not-
plan it. It's
Oh, yeah.
meticulously planned. And also, in order to get a real authentic feeling of Parisian streets, they use wired microphones or wireless microphones.
Mm-hmm. I
They don't
had
use
no
a
idea
boom
about-
mic because he doesn't, particularly maybe more in the park, but he doesn't want. And if you watch, some of the framing suggests there's no boom mic because they're too far away.
Right,
You know,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and he worked with small crews, and he had replaced the sound recordist. On his previous films with a new one for this, whose name is in the credits, I can't remember.
Yeah,
now,
and he's,
but who really was
we gotta
focused
get his
on
name.
direct sounds,
Mm-hmm.
and that's different from Hollywood filmmaking, by the way, in the sense that like sound is so poured over and planned and controlled, and in a sense it makes sense. It's industrial filmmaking, right?
Yeah.
But what Rohmer does is he captures the way that life is supposed to feel.
Yeah,
Also-
absolutely.
So in your wonderful notes, you have a line about how the editing focuses on the listener, which, by the way, I think is so cinematic in films when
Yeah.
the person speaking is not who's on screen, but rather the person reacting to that.
Yeah, it's really amazing when you watch this film and these dialogue conversations where it's always very simple. It's either you're seeing the two shot or it's getting the shot reverse shot. It focuses on the listener, and so you got to ask, like, what do we get when we look at the listener? So like as we're looking at it, her friend in this cafe scene, and then there's a great example with Lucy later on, who we haven't introduced yet, a character in the film. But let's talk about the friend. What do we get in these 20 seconds? There's this one part where we stay on the friend for 20 seconds. Like, Liam, what did you get seeing that for 20 seconds, what did that do
Well, I
for
feel
you
like
as
what that does is, it's this idea. Hold on one second.
Yeah.
Wanted to have the backup. What it does for me, it's this idea that movies, all art, but cinema in particular, is a way of thinking as opposed to just a presentation of images. Like, movies do not happen on a screen; they happen in your mind. Your reaction to them
Yeah.
is the storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not being
Yeah, that's
telegraphed.
beautiful.
Or thank you. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. It's not being telegraphed. You're not being told. I would say that in a lot of other more popular cinema, and not to be a hater because I enjoy popular movies too. You're not necessarily being engaged in an intellectual way. So when you are able to watch a person listening to someone else talk and seeing the way they react, and acting in the cinema is generally, let's say, realistic, natural, low key, all in the eyes, especially when you're not speaking. You become engaged in their thoughts, and you're creating your own thoughts, and like it's cinema, baby. Like the
Yeah.
idea that the movie's happening in your mind. There's a screen
Yeah.
projecting an image every second that you're in the dark for 24 frames. And that's the movie experience. And I
It's
think,
amazing. There's so many levels to it.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that that's what's beauty. And I think Rohmer uses like filmmakers like Hong Sang-soo. And this is not an original thought that I had. This is a Dennis Lim thought. But Rohmer makes films that are ways of thinking, as opposed to just cinematic stories.
Yeah. Well, it's like his films to me are the most sensual films filmed starring the most reasonable people. So like the deep senses or attachment to these like very visceral things like desire, but it's always going to be filtered through these characters that are always going to be two in their own head.
Totally. And also unapologetically real people. And I hate
Yes,
saying
yeah.
unapologetically, but like real people, which is a great way to segue
But not
into
non-actors. These are
not
all
non-actors.
These are all
Most
actors.
of these are actors, young actors, but actors.
Yeah.
And people, by the way, who know how to be on camera.
Yeah.
That's a huge distinction. Like, there is the fact that he makes documentary style footage, but he's still a dramatist, and he's
Yeah.
still a filmmaker, and he's still a professional filmmaker,
Yeah.
and he's not making documentaries.
Yeah.
So we leave this confrontation, and Francois, through a series of coincidences, well, one large coincidence, which is he ends up at a cafe the same as the Aviator, whose name is, one more time,
Christian.
sees him at a cafe with his wife, blonde-haired woman, and begins to follow him. And in following him, he follows him onto a bus where he sees a woman, and there's a great moment where they make eye contact that feels like a before sunrise reference. And then they end up in a park, Francois and this young woman, Lucy.
Yes.
And they keep bumping into each other, and then eventually she has engaged on his investigation. And this is, I think, a key idea of the movie. I sent you a screenshot last night that I think is the key moment in the movie, which I rewatched, where she asks him, "Are you a detective?" And he goes, "No." "Well, yes, sort of." And I think that this movie plays from this moment on, and maybe from the beginning, but from here on, in the existentialist drama way, as like, it's not just a search for someone else, it's a search for figuring out who you actually are. I mean, these are young people pretending to be, at times, things they are not.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I think one of those things these young people are pretending to be, including Anne, is mature. And then I feel like there's this certain theme of maturity. There's a certain point where Anne's like, "Oh, like you should be with someone younger, like Lucy. I'm much too old for you." And you and I are
she's
36,
25, but she feels
ish.
wizened.
Yes,
she feels
exactly.
And then she feels like she's trying to be older than she is. That's one thing for sure. That's true. And I think 25 was different than it is now.
25 is different than it is now. Yes,
you
absolutely.
probably were in some ways more mature, and not to mention Europeans, I think generally have a different level of maturity. But she's that girl who's always like, "I know more about the world than you," and you're like, "Okay, chill out. You're 25."
With the detective story too, it's also the result of this MacGuffin. So he's very like, I think of Rohmer as this like Hitchcockian filmmaker, and and you're talking about him as a dramatist and like how attuned a story is, and essentially what we have here is like this very classic MacGuffin. The whole plot is spurred on by just like, I need to follow this guy, but it has nothing to do with that. That's always just background, but it allows for these deeper discussions of like, and allows us to see what you described earlier as the meet cute. We get this amazing
and
meet cute.
detective stories to me are almost always much more interesting when they're not about the thing that they're obviously about. When they're about something.
I mean, that's
right?
like the Chandler.
Right, 100%, 100%. The meet cute, Sean. Tell us about the Rohmerian meet cute. How does it work?
So how does the Rohmerian meet cute work? Well, it works very organically.
Did you ever think you'd be asked that question in your life?
I never did, but I think it's it works in the way that feels authentic to life. And that's the thing about a meet cute, is that it always feels like it's a meet cute because it's the convenient way for people to meet, and then it immediately establishes a connection. But in this one,
right,
this meet cute is the entire 30-minute sequence with this character of Lucy.
40-minute, maybe.
40-minute, 30 to 40-minute.
You know what this movie replicates really well is the feeling of having, like, you're at a conference and you meet someone and you become buddies for a day, and you're like, and you feel like you've known them forever, but really it's been like 6 hours.
Yeah, but there is like some kind of like just general understanding and chemistry that exists between
chemistry is important, right?
The people.
And this actress who plays Lucy is unbelievable. Like, talk about a movie star, my God.
Oh, she's incredible. Anne Laure Murray. And she'll have a smaller role in Boyfriends and Girlfriends, which is the last film of the Comedies and Proverbs series.
For sure. And this is when the movie kind of also becomes a comedy. There's a bit in this where Lucy realizes what Francois is up to, and she's like, oh, let's get a picture of them. So she wanders over and meets these two people, one of whom who's from LA and another who's from Quebec, who speaks limited French. And that is Marie Stephan, Rohmer's editor, or at least on this film, assistant editor. And she tries to stage this moment where this guy who's a photographer, or I don't know if he's a photographer, but he has like a newfangled Polaroid camera.
It's the new camera. And like, it's an interesting thing to look back to that time where it's like, oh, right. Like, it was a luxury item. Not everybody would have had access, or even maybe because the Mary Stephan's character was like, sees Lucy handling the camera and asks her, like, do you know how to use that?
Do you know how to, like, your fingers over the lens?
Right. Like, it's such a different time to think about.
Totally. And photos are like more of a thing, right? Like now you could probably take a picture of that couple with your iPhone from like 30 feet away and they wouldn't notice. Like, it wouldn't even be a thing. But then, the image was like a very, very different thing. Which is why I don't let people take pictures of me. I just want my aura to remain intact entirely. So she tries to get them to take a picture of her in front of a tree, really with the couple, the aviator and his wife behind her. And the woman, they're like, why do you want to take a picture in front of a tree? And she goes, because of my tree fetish, which is such a weird thing to just suddenly show up in the movie. But
it just says so much about her as a character. Here's someone that's willing to go to this length, one, because she's enjoying this and is finding it all fun and amusing, but you just really get so much of like who this person is as a character that would say this. And we'll definitely have to add this sound clip in because it's just, her delivery is so good because she delivers it in French that tourists don't understand. They ask her to repeat herself and she says, tree fetish, and it's the tourist has a very funny reaction to it.
Yeah, it's nicer over here.
Oui, la lumière n'est pas bonne. Oui, mais je voudrais cet arbre sur la photo. Oui, c'est mon arbre fétiche.
Say what?
It's my tree fetish.
What?
She says she has tree fetish. She says she has a tree fetish.
Oh my God, these French girls are crazier than I thought.
It's funny. It's fun. It's a funny use of language, and it's, I find movies that deal with language and translation in a real way to be like very, very enjoyable because that's like real life, right? And I think what's so good about it is that it's first of all, it's played in a relative wide shot, which I think is the idea that comedy is always funnier in the wide. Like seeing someone slapped in the face in a close up is not funny. Well, it can be, but seeing
and there's very, very little close ups in this movie,
and they're almost all mediums. If there's anything resembling a close, it's actually usually a medium.
Yeah, he finds close ups hard to insert. And because he has so much
Oh,
movement,
that's
it's really
interesting.
hard to work with a close-up. And he also feels that close-ups subtract. They don't add to anything. They actually take away from everything that you could be getting. And so that's why you will not see a lot of close-ups in a Rohmer film.
Yeah, and I think again, it's all about suggestion. I think his filmmaking is largely about thought and suggestion.
But also that thought is connected to seeing more, not just seeing a close-up of someone's face. Because a lot of folks sometimes might frame thought in close-up.
I love when you say folks, it's a little like Obama is talking. Now, folks are going to say that the close-up offers more than the wide shot, but that's not true.
Well, there's a lot of commonly held film beliefs that I think Rohmer really proves are like total bullshit.
Give me one, quick.
That close-up is the source of emotion. And I think that is one of the most flawed ways of thinking. No shot has any a priori meaning. And so you could get emotion from any number of shots, and Rohmer quite shows, like, okay, well, you're going to feel things with this medium. You're going to feel things with this
Well,
line.
I think that another thing that Rohmer disproves is the idea that like a very edited movie, a very cutty movie is a good movie, because I think that like he understands something, which is like cinema is duration plus feeling, right? Like the amount of time you spend in a feeling is really, really important.
But he's not like a long take fetishist,
No,
like many
me,
other directors.
Like me, love a long take, love a long take. But no, he's not Bellatar. He's not.
It's mainly
Ruben
just to like
Östlund or any of these folks that really like to.
So much of his philosophy is like from Andre Bazin, and for Andre Bazin, it was so much about what makes cinema. Cinema is the unity of space, and so I think that's one of the main reasons you won't see too much cutting as well. It's like this very Bazinian idea of space.
I have to do this. Sorry. Now, folks are going to tell you that Andre Bazin. So we jump forward ahead. They spend some time together. Lucy and Francois part in a cafe where they're looking upon where they think is the apartment of the aviator and his wife, which is later revealed to be something else.
And then this is where their relationship also kind of takes a very interesting turn, where she starts to needle him and really kind of be honest and say, like, listen, Anne doesn't love you. And not in like a way that's like trying to be mean, but just being very honest. And you see him start to like actually sort of like bark back a little bit. This is the most like sort of emotion that we've gotten out of Francois at this point.
I think
And that's when Lucy's just like, all right, you know what? Like she sees that like this isn't necessarily going to go anywhere now, but here's my address if things ever sort of
she's very
change.
mature. There's a point in the film where she says she's 15, and I struggle with the idea that she's actually 15, to come back to the identity thing. I think there's some... I mean, look, a French 15 is different from an American 15. Like, these are all culturally specific milestones.
And
but
thinking of like their time period and just like understanding that this is what is normal in France and in 1980.
Anne and Lucy are interesting inverses of each other. And Marie is always...
And like personality.
Anne is always... I keep saying Marie. Anne is always trying to be like, I'm too old for you. Whereas Lucy feels like she's young by definition in that she's 15, but like seems wise and smart. And like she's kind of able to see through his bullshit a little more interestingly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then you also see... going back to the proverb, one cannot think of nothing. In that same cafe scene, you see that he asks her, it's like, oh, well, what about your problems? What are you going through? And she kind of skirts the issue. And we'll find out later on at the end of the film that there is another person in her life. She talks a little bit about him, but in like funny, vague terms.
Earlier in the film,
she's distracting herself as well.
So jumping ahead, we learn that later, the last time we see Lucy in the film, it's fine, we can spoil this, she's kissing a man. We will reveal who we think that person is later on. But earlier, when they meet and they're in the park, she says she doesn't have a boyfriend. She says she does have a boyfriend. She says, this is my non-existent, my fake boyfriend. Yep. And again, it's all about identity. These people, like, they're subconsciously like, I may never see Francois again, so I can play with my reality. And it's like the new sort of like the excitement of meeting someone, which is sort of paired against the drudgery that he experiences with Anne, who's like his relationship is not very good with. So we cut back to Anne. She leaves work. She's kind of accosted by a guy on the street or getting onto the train.
Oh, who's another amazing actor from Rohmer films. He's like so intense.
Really?
In his sort of like in his approach, like even just in that scene.
Yeah,
it's like being accosted by a friend you
just
haven't
kinda
seen in a
kisses
long
her.
time, but that's like an annoying
And I know
friend.
that again,
Yeah.
French, but like it's not like it's like, hey, I'm going to aggressively like put my lips on you. Like it's a lot to watch.
Yep.
This sets her off. She goes home. She gets into bed. She wants some time to herself. She calls Carrere, a friend of hers who she's going to see, and she's like, I'm tired, but he convinces her to come out. Just like go.
Oh
get
yeah,
the mail.
that's earlier,
It's earlier.
at work. So you actually get another little thing about Anne's personality is that like she'll she can't get out of things, which we'll kind of get a little bit more into with her breakdown. But when she starts breaking down, she's just like, like
everyone's telling me what to do. I don't get to make
everyone's
decisions about
telling me
my
what to do.
life, like and whatever.
Yes.
And there's this scene that feels Francois shows up kind of being a brute and demanding information. She is like, no, I'm independent. I can do what I want. I can love who I want. I can do all these things. And she sort of has this moment that's sad a little bit where she's like, no, like I'm I don't get to make any decisions for myself. Like you won't leave me alone. I can't like just have a night to myself, whatever. But right when you think their relationship's about to end, she's like, Francois, come, don't leave. Stay. Like, he's literally at the door, and she's like, come back. And then what follows is, by the way, a sort of shot from above them, tilted down, which so far it's kind of been played out in singles, but like medium singles.
Yep.
And all of a sudden they're together in a frame. But I feel as though there's a performance going on here. Like, she thinks this is what she has to do. Some way I felt like maybe she was placating him, or the reality is she does not want to be alone.
Yeah, I see. I didn't see like the sort of play acting or like the placating. I really thought of just like, it's like things are ending, but also like you don't want the person to go. There is like a certain relationship that exists, and like I'm like.
But at this point, we don't know that it's ending. I don't know that we know that it's over.
We don't know that it's ending, but it feels like
like
it's over but open, because she's like, maybe I'll come see you Monday. So they had their plans to see each other Monday.
But I still feel like they have plans. However, and I read an interpretation of this is an attempt for him to make her jealous, but he brings up Lucy. He talks about Lucy, and I think that's when it's over. When she's like, you don't know what you want. And this brings me back to my feeling about Francois, which is by the end of the film, I'm not judging him morally, but he kind of drives me nuts because he doesn't know what he wants. He doesn't know who he is. He only knows that like he has to feel sad or upset about his circumstance. And like,
yeah, but I wouldn't say he's like particularly like whiny about it throughout
no,
the
he's
film.
stoic. He's a bit of a stoic,
yeah.
But he's still like, she's right in the end where she's like, you don't know what you want. You don't know who you are. Like, you don't know anything about yourself.
Yeah.
Like, what bad thing? Nothing bad has actually happened to you. And that really resonated because I think I can speak to myself. Like I'm definitely like that. Like I'll be like if I'm stewing in my sadness, suddenly I'll go like, nothing happened. Or like I did this to myself, and that's the thing. He made an assumption because he saw two people together, and he's like playing the role of the boyfriend, and which is another thing this movie's about. It's existential, and it's like, what is your identity? Are you the boyfriend? Are you a detective? Are you
the
a lover?
boyfriend? Are you the replacement?
Right.
And like it sucks to have the realization, and like he's certainly making her jealous and bringing up Lucy. Well, what's so great is he starts talking about Lucy after we get the big twist, which we talked a little bit about.
Oh yeah,
earlier.
Spoiler.
So this is
Stop
a spoiler
listening
for
if you
the
haven't
movie.
seen this film from 1981.
Skip ahead 2 minutes, and Anne shows a picture of the Aviator. First of all, it's the best picture ever because you see the Aviator, Christian, we see the blonde woman, we see another brunette, and we see another man in the back. And from this one photo, Rohmer creates this relationship between all these
there's like a
people
story
within it.
there. It's like a Hemingway
There's
short
a story there.
just in an image.
Like,
yeah.
No detail is too small, but in this moment we find out that this blonde that they've been following with is not his wife. His wife is the other person in the photo who's a brunette as well. And so now we are led to believe that this blonde is yet another one of his mistresses.
But it is his sister.
No. Francois just thinks it's his sister. That's what Francois, when he writes Lucy.
I thought it was the mistress, but I thought it was initially, but then his note makes me think it's the sister. Did I misinterpret that?
Well, I think it's just like we never know, right? Like, so it's just like, oh, clearly this isn't. But he's, it's
There's
these things that we tell ourselves, and he's just like, oh yeah, well that's his sister, obviously, because he
again a resonance around identity. Who like we don't know who this person is,
and wanting to see the sort of truth that you want to see with the person that you want to see it with.
which is very cinematic, by the way, because it's all about the objective, the eye, the way.
But done in a very sort of like understated way.
So they break up, kind of officially but unofficially. She's like,
I think essentially it's like it's open, but they're broken.
And that
up.
final shot there is her standing in the doorway. We can't see him, and her arms against the wall, and we see the backside of her. And she's like, Francois, maybe you'll introduce me to friend. She also gets dressed, and she looks like she just puts this like styling outfit on, and it's like a really smart move to have her like get out of her work clothes and get into something that's like cool, hip, pretty lady going on the town thing. Because you're like,
right, and
fuck up, you fuck up. Come on, man, get it together.
But then Francois says something to her too. It's like, is that what you're wearing out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, that part of the thing is almost played in like it follows her around for a while, like the camera, right?
Like we're just the cameras.
Not
with her.
long takes in the sequence, but unbroken takes, and I think that's an important distinguishment between Rohmer and the long take fetishist is that he prefers an unbroken take, like a take that plays till its natural conclusion, as opposed to like
for sure, and then cutting to whatever that next take is. Yeah,
he likes.
It's not the exercise of the long take at all.
And he compares his work and other do to theater, and there is a theatrical quality, I should say, not to the filmmaking, but to the decision to like, let's let a shot play for almost like we're looking at a proscenium march. Not in the way that we view it, but in the way that it makes us feel. Let's stay with this for as long as is necessary. Like, let's not cut more than we have to.
Yeah. That's not overly cutting. There's never any extraneous angle. Every angle is to show us something new.
Francois
to give us something new.
Leaves, goes and writes a note to Lucy, brings it to her house. She's outside with a boy. And they are kissing. She walks away and she giggles.
This boy is...
And wait. He watches. The boy leaves. As the boy leaves, what happens? Should I do it?
We do it. So the whistling theme emerges again. We've heard it up to this point 3 times before. He does it with Lucy in the cafe. He does it one more time on his own, I believe, when he's in the room. And then we hear it at the beginning. And now we're hearing that whistling, and it is not from Francois. It's from his friend that he meets in the second scene of the movie. And this friend of his is Lucy's boyfriend. So the coincidences in this world of just like all the different relationships and misconnections are just like continuing to come to a head.
When he's leaving the post office, right?
This is the friend who's got the brother that's the plumber, that's helping Anne's plumbing. And so this is the friend he meets in the bathroom, and this is the friend that he sees again at the train station.
This is why I push up against the idea of spoilers, especially for movies like this, because this is not like a spoiler. It's not like, oh my God, it's Thanos. That'd be weird if Thanos showed up in a Rohmer movie. But it's more like an existential spoiler, like the connections. It's an existential spoiler,
but I mean, that's what makes these like it feels so impactful.
I find it makes it more of a spoiler.
In the movie theater, I mean, what a great collective experience. At that moment, you heard gasps in the movie theater.
Oh, that's the best.
This is like Hitchcock level shit. Of like this moment of just the reveal of a photograph makes us, because we've been so thoroughly involved in this story from the very beginning, and we only know what these different characters know. So there's just so many levels of engagement that Rohmer is playing with his audience, of what we know, what the characters know, what we know that they know, and it's all coming together in this scene, and it's like truly just the work of a master.
And the film ends with a beautiful song that Rohmer composed about living in Paris and feeling dejected and feeling alone and all these things. And we'll play it at the end of the episode. I hope that Rohmer's lawyers don't come for us.
When we post this online, I'd love to make a graphic of the lyrics for this poem, because it was written by Rohmer himself, and like the words are really beautiful, and I think it's worth it's a nice song to hear because it's a very old school French song, and he believed in that sort of old school Parisian musical tradition, but the lyrics of it are so just about loneliness and solitude in the city. And that being part of the charm of the city. Paris has charmed me, Paris has disarmed me. And so these lyrics are actually really nice, and these are all composed by Rohmer with the piano playing, as you said earlier, from his assistant editor.
This movie's great. I think we should conclude very briefly by saying that this film Rohmer insisted that this film only be released in 2 theaters. Paris was starting to experience the multiplication of movies, like making movies as profitable as quickly as they could. And his attitude was like, no, leave the movie in the movie theater for 6 months. Like, 150,000, viewers over 6 months is actually much more of a sign of success than 150,000 people in 2 days. Like, let's let these things play out and be real.
Yeah, and he understood that, like, a personal film is different from like a movie that's going to attract people right away. And
the
so to keep it
eventizing of cinema was something
with
he
the
wasn't
eventizing,
interested
and that happens in art house as well, and he's aware of that too. And in an interview with him in this great book that I've been reading called Eric Rohmer Interviews, he talks about the auteur star system, which is just as bad. He says, this is his quote: "We'll encounter the auteur star system, which is just as bad," and we see that playing out now. Like auteurs becoming like the events. Like Olivier Assayas and Noah Baumbach, they're the event filmmakers of
I think
the auteur star system.
the actual key one, and by the way, this is not a criticism at all because I love him, is Martin Scorsese. Martin Scorsese
For
can't
sure.
make a $20 million movie anymore. He has to make a $200 million movie that plays on a streamer. And like, whatever.
Yeah, and then
his
that's the
movies
brand.
are
The
still,
brand is that
still
it's a
good, but
Scorsese
from
movie.
the point, like sort of his sort of explosion again with The Departed, he goes on and he has to make increasingly large movies, with the exception of Silence, which actually only cost $20 million, but with lawsuits ended up being $50 million. And so it's wild. Listen, we're just scratching the surface of what we're going to talk about here. There's a lot to this podcast.
Yep.
Next up, Sean, what are we talking about next?
So next week, we're going to be looking at the 4 adventures of Reinette and Mirabelle. This is another 16 millimeter feature of Rohmer, which the Aviator's wife was as well. I'd love to get into this next week, the difference in these formats, but we'll be using this as just another entry point into looking at this movie and talking about Rohmer. All of these movies that we'll be talking about in these early episodes are available at Metrograph at home, and if you're in New York City, you could catch them at the
So hopefully
Metrograph
this
Theater.
episode will be up in time. That's a big hope. But if you're in New York City, the weekend of, this is really going to date this episode, but whatever, the weekend of Friday, August 12th through the 14th, and I think playing into the next week, The Adventures of Reinette and Mirabelle will be able to, you can watch it in the theater, but also it's available, as I'm watching it, on Metrograph at home until September 29th. So you've got plenty of time to see it if you can't make it in the movie theater. Find us on the internet. Sean and I are both on Twitter. What is my Twitter handle? It's
Liam G. Billingham.
Before Sean Rice. Yeah, it's Liam G. Billingham on Twitter and Instagram. My Instagram is private, but you can still find me there. Sean is at...
Oh, I didn't know your Instagram was private.
Yeah, I have a kid. I'm the fucking guy that posts photos of his child. Sean is at The Brown Sean on both Instagram.
So The Brown Sean, SHAUN, that's my handle.
Reach out, and this is coming up
Instagram.
on the Oeuvre Busters feed. This is coming out on the Oeuvre Busters feed, which is at Oeuvre Busters. We have to give a special thanks to our buddy George Fragopoulos, who was one of the original co-hosts with myself of Oeuvre Busters, for letting us put this on the feed and kind of making it a series, because we thought the listeners of that show...
Awesome. Thank you, George.
Thank you, George. Would like this show.
Just
and we're going to have
deep
him on.
Dive
We should have him on for a upcoming episode.
Absolutely.
I know he'd love to.
I'd love to bring on like other folks as well. Like, I think it'd be interesting, like, to be in conversation with the people that we are watching these movies with, the people that are friends of ours that are like, also seeing these things or just have interesting perspectives.
Right. So
I'd love to be incorporating lots of people onto the show.
And our boy Rohmer is not going away anytime soon. And this is going to be, like we said before, we're gonna when we find something to talk about, we're gonna talk about it. Thanks so much. This has been Rohmercast. I'm Liam Billingham.
And I'm Sean Sandvaratna.
Adieu, adieu, adieu.
Paris has charmed me. Paris has disarmed me.
I can't hit it there. Damn it. Thanks, everybody. Okay.
sur les marches du métro.